puppy tried to bite my hand the moment I lifted him from the crate. His teeth were small but sharp, and his growls sounded wrong for a body that thin. Men crowded around the feed store laughed when I flinched and set him back down. Someone said the dog was bad from birth. Another joked he would turn mean as soon as the sun went down. I did not laugh. I watched his eyes, wide and wild, and I saw something under the anger. It was fear, the kind of fear that bites first because it believes pain is coming either way. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single coin. I placed it on the edge of the crate. The store owner blinked like he did not believe what he was seeing. Then he snatched the quarter and said the deal was done. 25 cents changed hands, and the crowd shook their heads like they were watching a man buy a curse. I carried the crate outside without looking back. I already knew what they thought. I had lived long enough to stop needing their approval. My name is Caleb Turner. I live alone on a small ranch outside Red Hollow, Arizona. The land is dry and flat, dotted with mesquite trees that never seem to give up. The fences stretch long and straight, and on windy days the wire sings like it is trying to warn you. I keep to myself. I work hard, pay fair, and speak only when I need to. I have already buried too much in my life. A wife taken by sickness, a good horse lost to a bad fall. When I saw that puppy locked away like a problem no one wanted, something inside me moved, quiet but strong. As I carried the crate to my wagon, the store owner told me the truth. The pup had been found north of town near a burned shack, no sign of the mother. The puppy snapped at hands and refused food unless it was shoved through the bars. 3 buyers had already returned him. One man claimed the dog went for his throat. The owner said he did not want the trouble anymore. I nodded and loaded the crate. I did not ask questions that would not change the past. The ride home was rough. The puppy slammed his body into the wood again and again, barking like he was trying to fight the whole world. Dust rose behind the wagon as the sun climbed higher. I kept my hands steady on the reins and did not look back. I spoke anyway, calm and even, telling him we were going home. The words mattered less than the tone. By the time the ranch came into view, the puppy had gone quiet. Bright eyes watched through the slats, sharp and unsure like he was waiting for the first blow. I set the crate near the barn, far from the house, where the air smelled of hay and warm wood. I filled a bowl with water and slid it close. The puppy lunged, snapped, and knocked the bowl over. Water ran into the dirt. I did not jump. I did not yell. I waited, then set the bowl again. This time he drank fast and messy, like it might be taken away any second. I placed food nearby and walked off without trying to touch him. Fear cannot be rushed. Trust is not something you grab, it is something you earn. That night, coyotes cried in the distance, and the wind pushed against the barn boards. The puppy whined once, a thin sound that did not match his tough act, then went silent. I lay awake in my small house, staring at the ceiling, listening for trouble. I expected barking, crashing, maybe the sound of wood breaking. None came. The ranch stayed still, and the quiet felt like a question. At dawn, I returned to the barn. The food was gone. The water bowl was empty. The puppy stood in the back of the crate with his ears flat and his body tight. His eyes tracked me like a hawk watching a snake. I smiled just a little. It was not joy yet. It was hope, small and stubborn. Days passed and I kept the same steady routine. I brought food at the same times. I cleaned the crate. I moved slow. I sat near him and read from an old book in a quiet voice, not because he understood the words, but because he needed to learn that a man could sit close without reaching in to hurt. He learned the rhythm of my steps and the sound of my boots. The growling softened into low warnings, the snapping slowed. One morning he took a piece of food from my fingers through the bars. It happened fast, like a strike, and then he backed away again. I did not pull my hand back. I did not celebrate. I nodded like it was normal and stood up and left. Good things should not come with traps. People in town did not understand. Men asked why I kept a bad dog. They warned me I would regret it. I listened without arguing. Pain makes creatures sharp. Patience can dull that edge if you give it time. A week later, I unlatched the crate door and stepped back. The puppy burst out, not into freedom, but into the corner of the pen. Teeth bared, body shaking so hard it looked like it might break. I sat down on the dirt and stayed still. The sun moved across the yard, flies buzzed. The world went on like it did not care. Slowly, the shaking eased. He crept forward, sniffed the air, then darted back again. When night came, he crawled into the open crate and fell asleep with the door wide. I gave him a name anyway, Rusty, for the red tint in his coat when the light hit just right. It was a soft name, simple and warm. He did not answer to it yet. He answered to hunger and fear. Still, the name hung in the air, like a promise.
By the end of the first month, Rusty followed me at a distance. He learned the fence line and the barn smells. He learned the sound of the dinner bell and the shape of my shadow. He still hid from sudden noise. He still watched strangers like they carried danger in their pockets. I accepted it. Trust grows slow, like a fence post set deep in hard ground. One afternoon, Ryder passed along the ranch road and shouted a greeting. Rusty charged the fence, snarling wild for a moment, all teeth and fear. I stepped between him and the wire and raised my hand. I did not yell. I did not strike. I only said his name. Rusty froze, his eyes locked on my face, searching for what came next. I stood there, breathing steady, like the whole ranch depended on it. He backed away one step, then another. The rider rode on. That night, Rusty lay a few steps from the porch, not close enough to touch, close enough to guard. I felt that thin hope again, stronger now. The second month began with a change I did not expect. Rusty started waiting near the porch in the mornings. His body stayed low, ready to run if the wrong sound hit the air, but he stayed. When I stood, he stood. When I walked, he followed a few steps behind, like a shadow that still did not trust the sun. I kept my routine because routine was the safest thing I knew. Same feeding times, same fence checks, same slow pace. At first, Rusty stayed near the barn when I rode out. He paced and watched until I disappeared. Then one morning I turned in the saddle and saw him. He was trailing behind the horse, tongue out, legs working hard to keep up. I slowed and let him walk beside us. It felt like a quiet victory, the kind that settles deep. Training came without force. I did not use anger. I used my voice and my hands, slow and clear. Sit meant sit. Stay meant wait. Rusty learned fast. His sharp edge made him quick. Still, fear stayed close. A slammed gate could send him into panic. A raised voice could make him snap without thinking. I learned to read him the way I read the sky, the stiff tail, the pulled back ears, the way his eyes went too wide. When I saw those signs, I slowed down more. I lowered my voice. I gave him space to breathe. In town, people noticed. The laughing at the feed store softened. Some men still shook their heads and said I was asking for trouble. One man, Frank Miller, had a mouthful of opinions and a heart that liked fear more than truth. He spat in the dirt and said a bad dog stayed bad. He warned me Rusty would turn on me the first time he got hungry or mad. I met his eyes and said nothing. Words do not build trust. Time does. Trouble came out of the ground one hot afternoon. I was fixing a loose board on the far fence when a rattlesnake struck the post near my hand. The sound was sharp and sudden. The snake flashed like dry rope and struck again. I jerked back, but Rusty moved faster. He threw himself between me and the snake, barking and snapping, a wild storm in a small body. The snake struck at his chest and missed by inches. I grabbed a rock and ended it in one blow. When it was over, Rusty stood shaken. His chest heaved. His eyes were wide. He did not run. He pressed against my leg like his bones were trying to leave his skin. I knelt and placed a hand on his head. He stiffened, then something inside him gave way. He relaxed. It was the first time he did not pull back from my touch. I felt his heart racing under my palm, fast and desperate, like danger still filled the air. I stayed there until the shaking slowed and his breathing steadied. Something shifted that day. Not all the fear was gone, but a line had been crossed. Rusty had chosen me. After that, he slept closer to the porch. He ate from my hand without snapping. When I spoke, he listened, like the sound mattered. Strangers still made him tense, but he looked to me first, like he was asking what to do. I felt a new kind of company settle into my days, quiet, steady. Then the land tested us again. Late in the second month, dark clouds rolled in from the east, heavy and fast. Thunder cracked close enough to shake the barn windows. Rain hit hard, turning dust into mud in minutes. Rusty panicked. The first thunderclap sent him bolting past the barn and straight into the open field. I ran after him, calling his name, but the wind swallowed my voice. The rain thickened. The sky turned mean. By nightfall, Rusty was gone. I searched through the storm with a lantern in one hand and my hat pulled low. My boots sank into mud. My shirt clung to my back. I followed broken grass and fresh tracks until I saw marks leading toward the old ravine. My chest tightened. The ravine was deep and broken, full of loose rock and sharp drops. I shouted his name until my throat burned. There was no answer. The rain fell harder. The wind pushed at me like it wanted me to leave. I kept searching until the lantern sputtered and my hands went numb. At last, I had to stop. I returned home soaked and silent, the kind of silence that comes from fear you cannot fight. I sat by the window and stared into the dark. I blamed myself for taking him too far, too fast. I thought of the crate at the feed store. I thought of those wild eyes. I wondered if I had asked for trust before he could carry it. Morning came cold and gray. I saddled my horse before the sun was fully up and rode out again. Near the ravine's edge, I found him. Rusty was trapped on a narrow ledge below, pinned by bad ground and fear. Mud covered his coat. One leg was bleeding. His eyes looked dull with pain. When I called his name, his ears lifted weakly. He did not bark. He just watched like he was too tired to hope. I moved closer, slow and careful. The rocks were slick. The ground shifted under my boots. One wrong step could send me down too. I spoke softly, not as a command, but as a promise. When I reached him, I lowered myself and lifted him into my arms. He cried out, a sharp sound that cut into my chest. I held tighter. The climb back up burned my legs and tore at my shoulders. My hands slipped in the mud. I did not let go. When I reached solid ground, I fell to my knees, holding him close. Rusty pressed his face into my chest and stayed there, trembling, like he finally believed someone would not leave him behind. I carried him home, believing the worst was over. I was wrong.
Rusty healed slow, but steady. The cut on his leg closed, leaving a thin line hidden under his fur. He favored it when he ran too hard, but he did not complain. He stayed close to the porch now, close enough that his side touched my boot when I sat outside in the evenings. When I moved, he moved. When I stopped, he sat and watched the land like it belonged to both of us. 3 months had almost passed since the day of that quarter. I told myself Rusty was not ready for town. Loud voices and sudden hands could still send him tight and sharp. But on market day, he followed me to the wagon like it was his job. Then he jumped in without being asked. I stood there for a long moment, reins in my hands, watching him. His eyes were clear and steady. He was not shaking. I took it as a sign I did not fully understand. The road into Red Hollow was dry again. The storm mud had baked hard, and the wagon wheels bumped over it like old bones. Rusty sat near my boots, calm and alert, watching the world roll past. When the town came into view, that old pressure settled in my chest. I knew how fast people made up their minds. I also knew how slow they were to change them. The town square was full of noise and dust. Horses stamped at the posts. Men talked loud and laughed louder. Crates of feed and sacks of grain were stacked near the store. When I stepped down from the wagon, Rusty jumped down beside me. Heads turned. A few men recognized him right away. They remembered snapping teeth and wild eyes. Some stepped back without thinking. Rusty stayed close to my leg. His body was tense, but he did not growl. When a child ran past shouting, he flinched hard, then looked up at me like he was asking what to do. I placed a calm hand on his head. He stayed still. The men watching went quiet because they were waiting for a bite that never came. Then Frank Miller pushed through the crowd. He pointed at Rusty and raised his voice so everyone could hear. He said the dog should be put down before he hurt someone. He said I was foolish for keeping him alive. Fear spreads fast in small towns. A few people nodded. Some stepped away like danger could jump from fur to skin. Frank stepped closer and lifted his hand like he meant to scare Rusty or strike him if he had to. Rusty's muscles tightened. His lips lifted for a second, showing teeth. The crowd sucked in a breath. But Rusty did not attack. He barked once, sharp and clear, then stopped the moment I said his name. His eyes stayed on me, not on Frank. It was like he had learned a new rule, stronger than fear. That was when an old woman near the well made a sound like a sob. She pushed through the people, her hands shaking, her eyes locked on Rusty. She dropped to her knees in the dust and said the dog was not bad. She said she had seen him before. 3 months earlier, a place outside town had burned in the night. A man lived there who kept dogs for fighting. People knew it and looked away. The woman said when the fire started, one dog broke free. Instead of running, it dragged a puppy out through the flames. That puppy was Rusty. She said he had been beaten before the fire and hurt again after by men who tried to catch him. His anger had been a shield. His teeth had been his only safety. The square went so still even the horses seemed to listen. I felt the truth settle in my chest like a heavy stone. I looked down at Rusty, standing steady at my side, trusting me in a place full of strangers. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a dog who had been forced into a war before he ever understood peace. The sheriff stepped forward and knelt a few feet away. Rusty watched him, then turned his head and looked at me, checking. I gave one slow nod. Rusty stayed still. The sheriff stood and cleared his throat. He said the dog would not be harmed. He said some things deserved a second chance. He said this town had looked away too long and then blamed the ones who survived it. Frank had no words left. He turned away and walked off, shoulders tight. Men who had laughed before looked down at their boots. A few women wiped their eyes. The town that had called Rusty dangerous stood quiet because they finally understood what he had been fighting against. I finished my business fast. Feed, supplies, a small leather collar I had never planned to buy. When I climbed back into the wagon, Rusty jumped up beside me without fear. As we rolled out of Red Hollow, the sun set low, turning the land gold. The fences looked softer in that light, like even the desert could forgive. Back at the ranch, Rusty ran the fence line, then returned and sat at my feet like it was where he belonged. I fastened the new collar around his neck, not as a chain, but as a sign. He leaned into my hand and let out a quiet breath. 3 months had changed us both. But the silence in town that day was only the beginning.
The days after market felt different. Word traveled fast in Red Hollow, but it moved quieter now. When riders passed my fence, they slowed instead of shouting. Some tipped their hats. Some only looked, curious and unsure. Rusty watched them all, calm but alert,
standing close enough that his shoulder brushed my leg. He was not guarding out of fear anymore. He was choosing to stay. Life on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm. Mornings came with pale light and cool air. Rusty waited by the porch every day, tail low but moving, eyes fixed on the door. When I stepped out, he rose with me like it was natural. We worked the land together. He followed the fence line, chased off coyotes without going too far, and learned which sounds mattered and which did not. The sharp edge inside him kept dulling, not from force, but from knowing he was safe. Sometimes at night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and listened to the wind sing through the wire. Rusty lay at my feet, his head resting against my boot. I thought about the crate at the feed store, about that single quarter, about how close he had come to never knowing this quiet. I thought about my wife, about loss, about the empty space I had learned to live with. Rusty filled some of that space without trying. He did it just by being there. A few weeks later, the sheriff rode out to the ranch. He dismounted slow and kept his hands easy. Rusty watched him, then looked at me. I nodded once. Rusty stayed still. The sheriff said the place where the fighting dogs had been kept was being torn down. He said men were asking questions now, the right ones. He said sometimes it took one story to wake people up. When he left, Rusty followed him to the gate and watched until he was gone, then came back and sat beside me like the matter was settled. The silence that fell over Red Hollow did not come from fear anymore. It came from understanding. People stopped calling Rusty vicious. They called him lucky. Some said I was brave. I knew better. Bravery had teeth and scars. What I had done was simpler. I stayed. One evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the land in gold, Rusty walked the fence line one last time and came back limping just a little. He sat, leaned against me, and sighed deep and long. I scratched behind his ears, and he closed his eyes. No tension, no waiting for pain, just rest. I realized then that Rusty was never meant to be a warning. He was a lesson. Fear can look like anger. Survival can look like cruelty, and sometimes all it takes to change a life is one person willing to see past the bite. Some folks in town still talk about the day a cowboy paid 25 cents for a dangerous puppy. They say the whole town went silent after that. They say something changed. They are right, but the real change happened long before the silence. It happened the moment a scared little dog realized the hand reaching toward him was not there to hurt, and it happened the moment I realized that saving him had also saved me.